It's been said many times, life's a bitch, and then you die. The earliest known appearance of that well-known phrase goes back to 1982 from the Washington Post. I would have thought its etymology would be much older and prestigious than that, since it seems to perfectly sum up most people's existence. Though I would argue that it's all down to our personal perception. Life could be a beach, and then you die. I expended a great deal of time and energy in the last episode arguing for that perspective. One of the happiest times in my life, involving wonderful memories, is when I was a little kid in the early 60s. We had nothing, materially speaking, but the contentment and happiness was second to none. I'm the ragamuffin on the left, by the way. Those were days when holes in jeans were not the trend as they are today. You actually buy them like that nowadays. Go figure. Millennials, right? Those were the days when my mom cut our hair herself to save money. She put a bowl on our head and trimmed around it. Such artistic prowess. We had very little by way of things in those days, but what we had more than made up for material lack. Our perception ruled our emotions, and it was glorious, running around the local hills and valleys with our imaginations wild with excitement and in relative safety. There were very few perverts then, in those days. Well, there was the panty pincher from the tops, and that time in school when we were warned that if someone asked us to go see his puppies, to go home instead. But apart from that, those were the days. Let me give a little comparison with what I see today. Now, I was watching a video the other week where someone was recounting his childhood here in the US. I think he was a millennial. And he was complaining on how he hated his chores. In particular, his having to take out the garbage. He whined about how he thought it wasn't his job to do that, but was made to do it anyway. I smiled as my mind went back to my childhood, and one chore in particular. I had several of them, but this one stands out in contrast to the millennial. My dad was a coal miner, and in those days, if you worked in the mines, you had free coal every so often. I think it was a ton every quarter, so 4 free tons of coal a year. And a National Coal Board lorry would come around to deliver, having 4 one-ton compartments at the back of the lorry itself. And it would tip a ton of coal outside the house. None of your convenient sacks and stuff like that. Yeah, you've guessed it. My bro and I had to help carry the coal up 2 lots of steep steps and around to the back of the house where the coal shed was. Little wonder I had holes in my jeans. Take the garbage out, help carry a ton of coal up steep steps. But those were such days. I still obsess over them, trying to remember every little detail. Life was great. Life was simple. Life was uncomplicated. Since everything is perception, our wannabe controllers know only too well that you must influence perception if you mean to control it. That's why they consume so much time, money, and energy on manipulating the masses. Poor little me. Who am I? A stage-managed little nobody? No wealth, no status, no brains, a useless eater. I look in the mirror and see a grumpy old git getting older by the day, not to mention grouchier, and I find out my life is being directed by someone else. Damn! Every time I get up in the morning, I seem to have acquired a new ache or pain somewhere. I feel like I'm being abducted each night and by aliens and probed and sent back. Even Preparation H no longer works. Life's a bitch. I'm just waiting for the inevitability of the last part of the phrase. But the real grumpy grandpa is not that at all. The moniker grumpy and who I really am are contradictory. Now, I like David Icke. He seems to be someone who has his head screwed on the right way. he asks an extremely important question. Do our handlers want us to be able to say from a deep conviction that I am all that is, has been, and ever can be? I am all possibility. I am all potential. I am sovereign. Of course, the answer to that is obviously no. In this manipulated reality, the focus is to keep us in our place, because that elevated state of awareness is not manipulatable. And the only way to do that, that is to keep us down, is to get us to believe a lie. And so they manipulate your self-identity. I am my body, my job, my bank account, my station in life. I am important, or the opposite. Anything but your true nature. Life happens to me, instead of me happening to life. Now, I'm not saying a change in perception is easy. There is a lifetime of programming to overcome, and for me, it's a work in progress, hence the grumpy nickname. But I am saying it is possible to change your perception. It just takes effort and persistence. And it's certainly going to be a requirement for sanity in the months to come, especially here in the US, it being election year and all that good stuff. And as far as I can tell, the UK is no better positioned for an optimistic outlook, politically speaking. The subject matter we are dealing with itself does not bode well for our sense of security and well-being. Very few prophecies do, as far as I can see. They all tend to announce doom and gloom. And now that we are entering the end of days, perhaps it's on a global scale. Now, I raised a very important question at the end of the last video. I asked what prophecy is and how reliable the phenomenon is. Now, since we are looking at this from the perspective of a simulation, how does prophecy fit into that paradigm? Well, let's speculate a little, shall we? I'm the Grumpy Grandpa.
Welcome to the Grumpy Grandpa channel, where grumbling is a way of life.
Now, having learned computer programming myself, I am somewhat familiar with the concept of a programmed existence, and what I'm about to outline is perfectly reasonable to my mind. Now, in the context of reality being a simulation, prophecy could easily be interpreted in several ways. For example, if reality is a simulation created by advanced beings or technology, prophecy could be seen as pre-programmed events or outcomes intentionally embedded within the code. These prophecies would be predetermined and could serve various purposes within the simulation, such as guiding the actions of its inhabitants or providing a narrative structure. Secondly, in a simulated reality governed by complex algorithms, prophecy might manifest as predictions generated by analyzing vast amounts of data from within the simulation's database. Advanced computational models could forecast future events based on historical patterns, behavioral trends, and other variables encoded within the simulation's parameters. Prophecy could also arise as glitches or anomalies within the simulation, where certain individuals or systems gain access to information beyond what should be possible within the simulated reality. Think of déjà vu as a kind of a glitch. I'm sure we've all experienced that phenomenon. Now, along similar lines, think in terms of glimpsing the future. These prophetic insights or glitches could be the result of errors in the simulation's code or the unintended consequences of its design. Now, I have been a victim of that myself, in my own program designs, I mean. Information is assigned to a variable that shouldn't have been. Oops. Mistakes like that can change outcomes in unpredictable ways. Alternatively, prophecy might emerge as a natural consequence of the interactions and evolving phenomena within the simulated reality. Complex systems within the simulation could give rise to patterns or trends that appear predictive, even if they aren't explicitly designed by the simulator's creators. Again, unforeseen consequences. Overall, the concept of prophecy within a simulated reality raises intriguing questions about determinism, free will, and the nature of existence within such a reality framework. It blurs the lines between fate and freedom of choice, suggesting that even within a simulated universe, the idea of foreseeing future events remains a compelling and enigmatic aspect of human imagination and experience. Do we have free will? And how does that fit in with the idea of prophecy? If prophetic events are set in stone, how does that impact free will? Intriguing to say the least. Now, Archaics has a very interesting theory on this. In a previous video, we looked at one of the charts developed by Jason Brashears outlining the 7 seals of the Book of Revelation and the lead up to them. He uses the term isometric projection to describe events that corresponded in the past to the dates of the breaking of the seals. For example, 2028, if projected isometrically back in time, would be 2012. The time difference is 16 years, 4 times 4. Now remember, this repeating 4 is the tetramorph, or the Olympiad calendar, which is based on the number 4. The chart clearly demonstrates this. And to explain how isometric projection works, in his book, Nostradamus and the Planets of the Apocalypse, Jason outlines in details the mechanics of this phenomenon. He explains that in 1973, the World Trade Center towers were completed in New York City. In February of the same year, an Israeli military jet shot down a Libyan passenger airliner, killing 103 people. Now, these two events would appear to most people to be unconnected, separated by both time and space. September 11, 2001 is a date that indeed lives in infamy. And most of us old enough to recall exactly where we were at the time. And Jason asks, was this a predictable event? Is there a correlation between the World Trade Center demolition and the destruction of a Libyan passenger jet 28 years earlier? 7 times 4, 28. Is there a method by which someone could predict future events? Is it possible that the future of anything is sculpted from its history? And he says, yes, it is. Now, to back up this premise, he quotes famous physicists like Albert Einstein, who said, "The future is every whit as necessary and determined as the past," and that people like us who believe in physics know that the distinctions between the past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. Jason goes on to cite P.D. Ouspensky in his work Tertium Organum. Future events are wholly contained in preceding ones, and if we could know the force and direction of all events which have happened up to the present moment, that is, if we knew all the past, by this we could know all the future. And he explains that time is a geometric structure embedded within the human psyche. And then to sum it up, Ouspensky writes, "The past and future are existing simultaneously on the lines perpendicular to our plane. And the past is identical with the future because phenomena come from both sides and go in both directions." Jason then goes on to demonstrate how this works. This movement of phenomena going both forward and backward in time can be likened to ripples on the surface of a pond. An event happening in the present would correspond to the center of the circular rippling pattern on the pond's surface, the place where the disturbance of the water takes place. The ripples traveling to the left would symbolize past events, while those traveling to the right would be future events. No matter how far the ripples travel, they will always be equidistant from the epicenter of the ring formation. Each wave ring is the same distance from the center as the corresponding wave ring on the other side of the event. Now, the drop, which represents the event itself, creates the space-time structure represented by the wave rings, travels in both directions, past and future. The event, which is the center of the wave pattern, is the isometric epicenter. Now, the word isometric denotes something that goes in two directions at the same time. And in this instance, we are referring to timelines. So looking at the chart and the isometric projections on the chart, we can see more clearly the picture being painted for us. Now, this is calendrical isometrics. So we look at the year 1973, the epicenter of the timeline involving the World Trade Center completion and the destruction of the passenger airliner destroyed by an Israeli jet. In retrospect, we know that passenger jets were used to destroy the World Trade Center in 2001, 28 years after the World Trade Center was completed. Prior to 1973, 28 ring waves takes us to 1945 and to a little remembered event in US history, never mentioned by the mainstream media during the 9/11 episode. A US B-25 bomber piloted by Lieutenant Colonel William Smith crashed right through the 78th, 79th floors of the tallest building in the world at that time, the Empire State Building in New York City. The pilot was flying through low, foggy clouds and lost his bearings. The space-time connection is spookily precise. In 2001, Flight 175 slammed into the 79th and 80th floors of the South Tower, a wing even striking the 78th floor, according to David Icke in his book Alice in Wonderland and the World Trade Center Disaster. Now, from this, Jason Brashears reasons that had an observer been aware of this little remembered event in 1945, when considering the completion of the World Trade Center towers in 1973, the tallest building in the world in that year, then the observer could have conducted an isometric projection that would have predicted the year 2001 as a terrible day in New York history. This is how Archaics explains prophecy, or at least one aspect of it. In the last video, we looked at the fifth seal, events that take place outside of this simulation. Now, Archaic sees the spirit world as being outside of the simulacrum. Bear that in mind. In this seal, we are looking at martyrdom, and the individuals described have already been given their new avatar, the white robes. And in the new avatars, they will be returning to make war when the time is right. It's called the Battle of Armageddon. In the year 2036, something happens to change the fabric of our reality, where each of us will be identified as either righteous or unrighteous, awake or asleep. Now, at this point, it's impossible to change our status. This change also allows Apollyon to possess an avatar. Remember, we are sticking to the 4-year pattern of the tetramorph, and 4 years after 2036 is 2040, where we will witness the return of the Phoenix, which will occur in May of that year. So we have around 16 years, as of this recording, to prepare for that event. Now, this is such a huge topic, it's going to take several episodes to be able to grasp with any kind of coherence the scope of the event along with the consequences of such an occasion. That is the return of the phoenix phenomenon. Now, the phoenix phenomenon is a hypothesis which suggests that there is a hidden planet that returns on a regular orbital basis, 138 years to be precise, intersecting the ecliptic plane, which is the path that contains Earth's orbit around the Sun. The ecliptic serves as a reference for locating the positions of celestial objects in the sky, as most planets, asteroids and comets in our solar system orbit the Sun close to this plane. Consequently, when observing celestial bodies from Earth, they generally appear to move along or near the ecliptic. Now, it's important not to confuse the planet Phoenix with the ninth planet, or Nibiru. These are separate objects. The planet Phoenix comes down, intersecting this circular line of planets, or the ecliptic. And when that happens, the Sun darkens and the Moon changes colour, the colour of blood due to the casting of a shadow. And this transit, which Jason says has been recorded repeatedly in history, causes huge disruption on the Earth. In 2040, he says the return of the Phoenix will cause a pole shift. The isometric counterpart to 2040 is the year 2000, 10 times 4. Again, for those old enough to remember, the deep state had everyone on edge with the worry that the whole electronic system was about to crash. This was going to happen because everything was linked to clocks on computers, and due to legacy programming, the computers would not acknowledge the year 2000. Do you remember the Y2K concern? Millions of people bought new computers, many became preppers, and the collective consciousness changed the cultural dynamic. It was all BS, but millions bought into the bunker. So what was behind this scare? Well, it was a ritual which will become fact in 2040, if archaics is correct. Remember, we looked at the ritualistic aspect of the breaking of the seals with the 2012 London Olympics opening ceremony and the coronavirus ritual. The return of the Phoenix is the sixth seal. And I beheld when he had opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became as blood, and the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind. And the heaven departed as a scroll, when it is rolled together, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, and the chief captains, and the mighty men, and every bondman and every freeman hid themselves in the dens and in the rocks of the mountains, and said unto the mountains and rocks, Fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? This is describing the pole shift that is to take place, and the effects will last through 2046, if archaics is right. According to this book, not by fire but by ice, this could happen any time now. We are due for another pole shift. Could archaics be right about this? In 16 years' time, will we see this terrible destruction brought on by the return of the planet Phoenix? Do scientists agree? Well, we will look more closely at this phenomenon in the next episode. Until then.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the Grumpy Old Buggers channel, so I can get some peace and quiet.